I titled this talk, The Giant versus the Pygmy, or if it had a subtitle, David and Goliath. And you'll know the biblical story. Your speaker has a deeply embedded hope that what he is about to reveal will be clearly understood, accepted, and applied so that mankind will grasp the fullest significance of his relationships within himself. What we shall explain in years to come will be accepted in toto as a working and workable plan. We will not live to see that day, but our prophecy is that it will come to pass, perhaps not possessed by our people, but by the great mass, who will then know what we now vividly and graphically foretell. Our disclosures are what man seeks today in his closer communion, in his companionship with his Creator for the betterment of all mankind, that he may take his place in the great scheme of things which his designer so masterfully and skillfully intended him to be and do. Two and only two fundamental and basic approaches to all things natural have their normal and simple principle. The chiropractic fundamental and basic approach is the same. From innate intelligence above, down to, and through man's body below. When that flow in that direction is normal, man is alive, healthy, and normal. Interference to this flow, from above down, inside out, produces a reduced normality to abnormality, from life eventually to death, from health to sickness. The correction of this interference re-establishes abnormality to normality, from death to life, from sickness to health. People appreciate the above common source, desiring that more of that which is above will become a part of the living creature here below. Chiropractic is based on that same common principle. For countless eons of time, the universal law, with many subdivisional applications, has been producing mankind as one manifestation. For many centuries, many millions of confused men, women, and children with endless diversified emotional minds, with myriads of confused ideations, with a multitudinous babble of strange voices and languages, have sought sustenance from outside in, below up, for ease for their trials, troubles, and tribulations, to improve their status while on earth. Has man, in that method of approach, created any new laws or better principles of that law? Or has he merely used that law and principle that which were existing in their entirety as they came from above down, inside out, into and through all mankind alike, without variables, with no favorites as to race, color, geography, or degree of understanding, bringing one common law of life to all with supreme consistency and constancy. How much, if any, or in what way, has any man, one man, or many men, from outside in, below up, modified, changed, improved, or injured any of the natural God-given laws, or used, utilized, and made possible the uses of any, many, or all the God-given laws and their principles from above down, inside out. There is but one law of life in man. Why then must man or men deem it necessary to have individual complex theories elaborated in endless arbitrary and empirical methods, from outside in, below upward, experiments born today, die tomorrow, even after thousands of years, they still ask for millions of dollars, hoping to wander in despair, hunting for many causes and many cures. No wonder they can't, don't, and won't understand the simplicity and accuracy of one cause and one cure, and call it a cult, kicking it out from its proven principles of accomplishments. Has man here below, with all his guesswork, given birth to or created any new law not heretofore in existence, previous to his being born, living, or leaving behind in his passing? For many centuries, there can be little doubt of the truth of man's failure to find a cause, a cure. I would appreciate it very much if that conversation would stop outside there. If necessary, I'll come out there and stop it. If this be true, is it possible to treat ills with drugs from outside in, below upward? Or is it the essence of reality to permit the wisdom of one cause, one common source, common to all mankind alike, to flow from above down, inside out, into and through an endless procession to all mankind without discrimination? From this actuality, we realize the common desire of all. But can we, as mortals, who seek truth, modify, amend, or change the law of immortality? Is it possible for us to treat human effects, symptoms, and pathologies of body and soul in and of ourselves with disrespect and barbarously kick it out the front door, saying it must go? Or is it good judgment to permit the universal and unital law to be adjusted to and in us as it likes. Does man improve law by scoffing, calling it a cult, by what he does, as he does it? Or does the law continue to live in spite of him who scoffs because of what it continues to do as it does it? In a universal law of a one cause created for a specific purpose and not used by men for that one cure, specific purpose, will be destroyed by man for man. But it will still exist as and by itself in its products, from productions to reproductions nonetheless. We hold the same brief for all the vertebrata. We are interested in both bipeds and quadrupeds because all species and families exemplify the same universal and unital law of life, observing the same duality of the same common denominator principle. They produce and reproduce in like manner. When left to their own, the sexes balance. What is it which predetermines one or two coats, one or two calves, a litter of pups, or a litter of kittens? What predetermines in the genus Homo whether we'll have one child, twins, triplets, quads, or quints? Is this something which education controls? Without an abstract college or university training, animals sustain the same one cause, internal life, as we. Yet they do not worry about how to sustain their internal functions, about the one cause, source of where life comes from, or how or why these productions exist at all in their natural and normal states. They do not maintain drugstores, soft vaccines, or antibiotics. We of the modern super-educated times want to know the mysteries of life itself and how to make it over and mold it to our book patterns and designs. Would we or could we change it? Or would it be just as good, better or worse, if we didn't know it? Would we exist the same without that knowledge? Is the savage who lives in ignorance of what we think necessary worse off in not fussing and fuming about what we think vital? If and it, as our particular thinking, be it right or wrong, has that changed the patterns of man? Suppose our chiropractic cult was obliterated. Our one cause and one cure was dictatorially effaced. Would man be better or worse? When individuals understand the future practice of the principle of one cause, of a single, simple, and natural relationship between one universal law that comes from above down, inside out, in and through themselves, with a free, uninterrupted flow, rather than the present-day complex, multiple, and unnatural relationship from below upward and outside in. Then companionship and comradeship between people will be more sane, healthful, lawful, and free of medical fetishes, superstitions, thinking they must regulate the worlds outside when they are unable now to govern the inside of themselves with justice. Man wants to reach the moon, circle that moon, and return alive. He wants to know whether anybody lives there or not. Man is spending billions in hopes he can learn about some things in far distant lands. What about himself? Inside himself? What would occur if he could reach inside himself, explore himself, know the inside of his creation and how created, and thereby know more accurately and fully about this inside fellow that lives and has its being within himself? It costs less to discover these great unexplored, unknown, undeveloped continents alive in his inner personality, all of which surface has been hardly scratched, much less dug deeply into its recesses. Everything today is materialistic, outside in, below upward. But I say to you frankly, everything tomorrow will be immaterialistic from above down, inside out, and we are helping to bring that about. Some of our profession belittle and scoffingly deny the obvious philosophy, calling it a cult, upon which man, his birth, function of living, and process of how and why he gets well when sick. All ideologies, regardless of name, are a cult in horizon or in overall broad applications of the desires of humans to understand, reach up to attain knowledge of the governing factors which are beyond their control in their inter and intra relations to the great one common source through their short span of existence. To cynically and vehemently deny the presence of a greater source of an abstract life than our materialities, physical substances, or sciences based thereon, is to prove how insignificant is the scope of our prejudices bypassing us in refusing to see beyond the limitations of commonplace matter. We take pride that we can look at mankind and acknowledge to him that we are cultists of the same order as they, whereby we have a source of life the same as they, which can be reached, which gets sick people well in all of us the same as in them. What would we be What would the world of living tissues be or do without one all-common, basic, and fundamental principle of cults? Even though each is curiously different, all become as one universal, unital, survival, ideological cult. The same cult we inculcate as our base, which we communicate as the philosophy of chiropractic. Finally, there is one indisputable molding principle from which we all spring and have our being, to which we as chiropractors arrive if we are to continue functioning, living, surviving, getting sick people well. The opposite of a cultist is an infidel, agnostic, or atheist. The infidel denies a superior source greater than himself with which he is infested. The agnostic says, I don't know there is anything above or beyond of a superior source than my scientific mass of flesh. The atheist disbelieves there could be a greater source than his own little education. The great mass of the thinking world are cultists, which is a matter of choice. Those distant few who actually are infidels, atheists, or agnostics are few and far between. We have some such in our profession who place physical matter above the abstract mentality which formed them. To despise the cult of chiropractic is to tempt destiny, something no man could skillfully demonstrate. We would rather be dubbed a chiropractic cultist, admitting, acknowledging, and leaving no doubt that there is a superior one cause, source, from which humans come into existence, which permits us to get sick people well, than be dubbed a chiropractic infidel, agnostic, and atheist, denying there is a superior source which has perpetuated millions of men and women after a definite pattern for time almost without beginning or ending. To belittle the cult of chiropractic is to belittle the principle also of the cult of the source of our being. More and more, there is coming into human consciousness where cults are becoming more practical in their approaches to the proofs of contacts of healing powers within ourselves, from above down, inside out, of the same cult on which all are based. Does it make any internal difference to this law whether finite man calls it a cult or a saint? We don't regard it as a disgrace to call chiropractic philosophy a cult, or the reverse. To acknowledge the innate within us is an honorable acknowledgement. Regrettably, there do exist a few in our profession who put on an outer veneer of conformity with the great mass of the unwashed, the unscrubbed. They are neither stable, fixed, nor permanent in what they try to do by way of external methods from outside in, below upward, to get sick people well. As they drive, they wobble and weave back and forth from case to case across the medical center yellow line, with many causes, for many cures, one therapy for one disease, a differing therapy for another sick organ, hopelessly and helplessly floundering in despair. They double the burden of innate, who works from inside with its one cure for one disease, but also is compelled to overcome the hurdle of what the skeptic drugmonger from the outside piles in and on in addition. They have no deep convictions on how to get sick people well, so they experiment like medical men. They adjust vertebral subluxations, or think they do, to satisfy a cult, to justify a state board to renew their licenses. Then give anything, many things, each for a different organ and different disease, so they can urge, coax, coerce, help, assist, stimulate, or inhibit, they know not what, to placate a respectable sick person who doesn't know which is right or wrong. They know that life flows from above down, inside out, never from outside in, below upward. In spite of this, they endeavor, these types of people, to reverse the law, thinking they can cause the human life river to flow uphill against the direction long ago established by the law of gravitation, little reasoning that the governing direction of the flow of life is always one way and applies to all bodies alike, in spite of him, not because of him. What a man thinks, whether it be Sunday or weekday, makes no difference to innate within. No two sick people are sick alike, think alike, but innates in all of them are alike. It follows that our one cause cult, and if liberated from interference, proceeds to get him or her well, for our chiropractic cult is so internally understandable that it ignores ignorance of educated man and proceeds to get him well, in spite of, not because of his false condemnations of what is stored away inside above. Regardless of the differences of educated conflicts raging back and forth between this clique or that clan, one common, natural, and normal, basic, fundamental remains the fixed factor which does not vary, with which sick man lives or the chiropractor needs do to get him well. 7 days of the week, every hour of the day, each adjustment he gives, if given right, at right time, in right way, is designed and destined to make possible one cure, to permit the greater power above and within to have a full free flow from above down, inside out, making it possible for the sick to get well, more feebly expressed when many say nature cures. This universal application of one universal law follows automatically, regardless of what one may have or some may not believe in or follow, regardless of color, country, habitat, differing languages spoken, equator or jungle, all get sick one way, not many, of violation of the law of flow of life from above down, inside out. all get well one way. Not many. A restoration of that law of flow of life from above down, inside out. Getting well might be accidental, as it frequently is, or intentional, as it is with the chiropractor. That is what makes this above-down, inside-out principle universal everywhere to all people. So gigantic are its tentacles, reaching out into the lives of the multitudes of billions of people, that it is difficult for we little insignificant people to grasp its tremendous importance.
This is the end of side 1. Please stop the tape here and turn it over to play side 2.
History is replete with dominant personalities. Each in his time and turn came forth with new interpretations of the solutions of the great mysterious diseases unknown. They wrapped each up in a package what they thought was a better explanation of the whys and wherefores of how the great superior intellect of the universe created all living things from above down, inside out. Differences of medical approaches, details of time, gradually created a following fitting the circumstances of newer traditions, definitions, and understandings, fitting more to the environment and the needs of that age. Geography often had phases of why they varied. Tribes had legends handed down from father to son through years. Each in his time, thinking his new interpretations were an improvement over previous ones, established a theory, new causes, new cures. And because of their complex thinking and presentation, they gathered a following. As we look backward into history and forward to these multitudinous constructions, we find all had one basic and fundamental principle which was applied to all human races under one common blueprint and pattern. Regardless of being improved and rugged mortals, the pattern of production, performances, of conception, fetal development, birth, performances of one only all-over human function, performed in like manner in production of function in the unit, and the reproduction of the races remained exactly the same. We are not concerned here and now in whether anyone was right or wrong, or more so than any other. Neither are we privileged to enlarge on the mistakes of many. But we are vitally concerned in how and why one universal law worked through each man and woman and through all mankind exactly alike, never varying, fluctuating, or changing. Any population or section which would try to live entirely on the outside-in, below-upward theory of existence sees the worlds of minute creatures as evil, devilish, put on earth to kill human races. Germs, bacilli, parasites, scavengers, seen only with a microscope, living on the outside naturally and normally into their own. He who thinks in reverse premises sees them invading man from the outside, eating his tissues, destroying health, as causes of endless diseases, eventually causing death. Apropos, there was but one thing to do: kill them inside from outside. That cause diseases inside, with insecticides inside man, with antibiotics of endless accumulative destructive survival values. Little does this twisted thinking realize, if there wasn't a germ in wheat, there would be no wheat. That germs are found consistently and constantly in all people who are well, who never get sick because of their presence inside. Being a truism, there must be a realistic and factual explanation beyond. They, like rats in garbage pails, are scavengers, keeping our alleyways and hallways clean and healthy, devoid of unnecessary internal decomposition of materials in passage. They are friends, not enemies. Nowhere in history has anybody yet discovered how to kill germs in man without killing man, where the cure is often more devastating than the disease. Man has yet to learn that the innate within selects, accepts, or rejects what it needs for bodily economy and sustenance. We look at oysters. We think they're good. We chew and swallow, only to have to reject them as unfit to remain in the stomach. Man thinks of vitamins as foods to supplant what he thinks is not contained in the food he buys and prepares. Little does he know whether they contain or do not contain what innate inside wants and needs. Therefore, he thinks to supply substitutes which he manufactures artificially from the outside to be taken inside. Man does not know the proper quantity or quality of substitutes. Innate may get much or little or some from the substitutes, contrary to man's ideas of replenishing from the outside what he thinks nature does not supply naturally. Innate knows more in 1 second what is needed than man can ever know. What is innate's food supplements could easily be innate's poisons. Innate is as 1 grain of sand to a seashore, as 1 drop to our ocean. How great that innate is. 5 years ago, when Mr. Hoover was 80, he made a speech in which he made the important point that the current concern with the common man glosses over the fact that when we get sick, we want an uncommon doctor. When we go to war, we yearn for an uncommon general or admiral. When we choose the president of a great university, we want an uncommon educator. And perhaps with just a suggestion of a thumb at the nose, we need men and women who cannot be intimidated, who are not concerned with applause meters, nor those who sell tomorrow for cheers today, said Mr. Hoover. Experiment after experiment, no sooner tested and lauded than they are found to be failures. Then comes another trial of more. It's the difference of approach, which is the greatest wisdom. The internal representative of the sage of the ages, the superior power, or man's infinitesimal education of 40 years here below, whether life can be artificially and chemically manufactured externally and balanced against the long and multitudinous variables internally, which began long before any living man of today existed and will continue long after the present race passes into the limbo. The conflict continues to rage between above down, inside out, which flows naturally and normally, and from outside in, below upward. One is right, the other never can be. Between whether the immortal is supreme or whether mortal man can supplant it. We respect all desires to help man for the good they do to help, adjust himself to environmental trials, troubles, and tribulations. We do not frown on such in the endeavors to ease man's path of suffering and pains. We do hold, however, most high our knowledge of the greater inner power within man, the surface of which has been hardly scratched, a continent of unknown potentials, which is the factuality which does save human life, reduces suffering, and lengthens human lives. We hold most highly every person who puts forth that additional effort to study this internal law and cooperates with, understands it, applies it, and works conjointly with that law. After traveling over the world for many years, knocking off 1,582,000 miles or more, and living intimately in the homes of these many leaders, Marcus Bach finally came out with his statement when I asked him what all of his investigation and study came to. He said, I'm studying to find out what makes man tick, just as if it made any difference whether he found it or not. It would tick on just the same. His answer was, all roads that are good lead to God. Now we find no fault with that thought involved. Rather, however, we prefer the reverse law. All roads that lead from God to man, from above down, inside out, are good. There's the difference. Our reason for differing is that one states a justification for man's ideas, the other defines a universal working principle. Whether you regard the flow of all good comes from outside in, below upward, as Marcus Bach's definition implies, or whether it flows from above down, inside out, as ours implies. It takes fearless vision to speak a bold opinion which reverses previous medical approaches. However, where there is one law, one principle, one practice involved both ways, then silence would be criminal to the welfare of man. When this past outside-in approach be wrong, accomplishing little, and a better approach from above down is a factual one. In the early days of the horse's carriage, Ford's Folly and his Tin Lizzie came into being. What would we do today without the automobile. In the early days of Darwin, his species and families of species were denied by scientists of those days. Today, it is accepted as a basic and fundamental law of the arrangements of all things which grow and live. In the early days of Franklin, many made sport of such a thing as electricity with its unlimited law of power in the sky. Franklin was an example to be ridiculed. Today, the world would be paralyzed without Franklin's electricity. Edison was exhibited as an example of ignorance, a crazy kid fooling with and tinkering with toys. Today, Edison is the wizard and praised for how much lighter he made living. Franklin discovered electricity, but Edison made light of it. The Italian scientist Galileo of modern science was scorned. Harvey, discoverer of a fluid he called blood flowing through arteries and veins, died a pauper because he refused to refute his findings. Spence and many other independent thinkers were scoffed at. Even to the Christ and his disciples were no exceptions. In the early days of Newton, they ridiculed his law of gravitation. Many tried to deny it as sound. Time has proved that no man today can deny Newton's law of gravitation. In the early days of Alexander Graham Bell, when he tapped off that single message of what God hath wrought between New York and Washington, little did he grasp the significance that the day would come when all the world would be linked into one great communication center in sky, on land, under the sea, as we use it today. And may I digress for a moment? When we went on the air first in 1919 with WOC, I prophesied then that the day would come when we would bring the world into your home where you could hear it, see it, and have pictures in color. And that was back in 1919 when it was just a little kid's toy. So some people seem to have some vision about something. In the early days of Einstein, with his law of relativity, mathematicians thought him unbalanced, insane and off his trolley. There was no space. There was only time. From out of his law has come a greater power than man thought. The nuclei, protons, neutrons, to where a pill would send a submarine under the sea around the world. In the early days of D.D. Palmer, he was called a fake, a quack, a robber of money, of sick people. He was laughed at and scorned here in Davenport. He discovered a new principle, an interpretation of an old principle, hitherto unknown, yet always present in all people alike. Today, millions bless him for lengthening their lives, relieving their aches and pains, and making living a blessing, making reproduction a joy in millions of families. Little did D.D. Palmer know that when he liberated that innate spark in Harvey Lillard, which restored his hearing, he was to stir up a hornet's nest as to the righteousness of that principle within his own family of followers. Nor did he understand the breadth, length, and depth of how or why he was to originate a new premise in the world of man's philosophies, sciences, and arts, of an abstract, distant, and yet as near universal God in which millions place their hopes, aspirations, and by so doing made the God of the universe a living, real, tangible God in man, which flowed downward in man, worked in man, became an ideal, but became a workable, practical, actual, and realistic knowledge which could be depended upon to reproduce life, perpetuate life, and prolong life if, as, and when sick people got well. His successor, who by right of inheritancy formulated this law of life into consciousness in the minds of man, presented its postulates, methods of sources and impressions. He presented tangible proof in millions of sick of the correctness of those deductions. This man dared to be a nonconformist, a firm adherent who took his father's principle and developed it into a sound philosophy, practice of science and art, which worked when worked with sincerity and when properly applied. This man at the age of 18 found himself in relation to this fundamental principle. He elaborated on the natural, normal facts of a law, that everything which lives, thrives, produces, and reproduces itself comes from above down, inside out. Now, up to that period, all people reversed that principle, turned it upside down, and said all things which run them came from outside in, below upward. And medicine was based on that latter principle. No man can, could, or has ever successfully reversed the natural law of life and succeeded in getting sick people well. He who works with law succeeds without apologies, in spite of sarcasms, because it works. Nothing artificial can supplant that difference. Chiropractic will survive. It will live. No great truth, once known to man, for man's welfare, ever has been destroyed or defeated because of the selfishness and greed of ulterior interests who think less of it and more of their dollar income, sacrificing mankind to get it. That God of the universe, which always has been spoken through many tongues, many languages, worshipped in many forms, written about in many books, interpreted in many ways by many consecrated men and women. But no greater has been proven than when man himself proved the existence of a living God in living man by making it possible for that everlasting God to become a tangible, seeable, existing reality in him. In this sense, Chiropractic is almost a living God-like religion in man, which no man has any right to try to cast out of man or to say that God in man must go. Merely because some are so blind they can't see, so deaf they won't hear, so insensible they can't sense its greatness in man as a living being. Our chiropractic philosophy is a natural, normal interpretation of an internal and eternal law of life. Your concept of it does not and cannot change its reality. What you believe outside and above, that may be for your spiritual benefit. But this law of life is a need to live, which you would cease to be if it passed out. What more could man ask for, want, or need? The value to mankind of that God law in man depends upon how well man permits that God law in man to express itself, and how much he utilizes that law of life to become a law of everyday action in himself and in others, wherein he aims to liberate that law in himself as well as in others. Time always has and always will perpetuate those methods which better serve mankind. Chiropractic is no exception to that rule. Now, just in closing, our illustrious father placed this chiropractic trust in our keeping, to keep it pure and unsullied or defamed. We pass it on to you, unstained, to protect, as he would also have you do. As he passed on, so will we. We admonish you to keep this principle and practice unadulterated and unmixed. Humanity needed then what he gave me. You need what we now give you. Out there in those great open spaces are multitudes seeking what you possess. The burdens are heavy, the responsibilities are many, the obligations are providential, but the satisfaction of traveling the populated highways and byways, relieving suffering, prolonging lives, adding millions of years in millions of suffering people, will bring forth satisfaction and glories with greater blessings than you think, and time is of the essence. May God flow from above down its bounteous strengths, courages, and understandings to carry on. And may your innates receive and act on that free flow of wisdom from above down, inside out. For you have in your possession a sacred trust. Guard it well. I thank you.